Hi, and welcome to the Inner Stories Studio, where we believe that stories are transformational. Whether that's the story that you're writing on the page or the story, your own inner story that you're discovering through journaling or somatic writing. And my name is Alicia Mahali. And today I wanted to do some story alchemy with you. And story alchemy is where we, learn the writing and story craft needed to write transformational stories, stories that can inspire, stories that can entertain. So the topic I wanted to discuss today is show versus tell, and specifically showing versus telling emotions and how to do it, why it's important. And I actually wanted to show you how to use somatic writing to show emotions on the page. So I'm just gonna pull up my handy dandy slideshow over here. Mhm. Okay, here we go. Show or show, don't tell. Okay, so show, don't tell character emotion using somatic writing. That's the topic. And alrighty, so first I wanted to just talk a little bit about showing versus telling. And the basic wisdom out there, the common wisdom out there, is that really when we write, we need to show and tell. Okay, and I know really actually used to be show don't tell, and now it's show and tell. And I do agree with that. I do agree that we need a combination of showing and telling, maybe a little bit more on the showing side, but telling is also very important. If you just stick to showing, your story is going to could end up very confusing. And I think that's also one of the advantages of writing a story versus like a video or a movie is that we get to tell, we get to, say some of the thoughts in the character's head. You could tell a little bit of backstory here and there. But that's kind of a different topic because today I want to actually focus on showing emotions. And I made another video about how to show the lie the character believes on the page. And you could check out that video. I'm not going to go too much into that right now. And one of the ways of, you know, making the lie, there was different layers of how the lie could show up on the page. And some of those layers, I think you could tell more, and some of those layers, showing would be better. Like some one of those layers were the character's thoughts, the character's behavior, the character's need, their motivation, and one of the very important ones was the character's emotions. Okay? And I think specifically for emotions, showing is much more powerful than telling, even though is definitely still a place for sometimes telling in terms of emotion. I think for the most part, emotions, the character's emotions is something that you need to show. And why is that? Because that really helps, to get into the character's body, to get into their head, and to really understand them, to really experience what they're experiencing. And that's also going to make your story's message and themes like really just course through the reader's veins and instead of it being a vague moral on the page. And that's really important because um, really like when you have a theme and you have a message in your story, it's usually not like a black and white type of message. And by showing the character's emotions, that's where you get to bring out the nuances of your message and your theme. And also, even though, of course, your character is going to have a huge spectrum of emotions, I mean, like any, like normal living person within an hour is going to have a spectrum of emotions, and that's not just going to be one feeling. But still, there should be like one core emotion that's pulsing through your story. And that one core emotion is really tied very closely to your theme and your message. So I'm not going to go into this too much right now, but just a little bit to scrape the surface so you understand what I'm talking about. I'll give you an example. Like, let's say if you want to create a story with a theme about individuality versus belonging, and the cost of, how much a person should give away their individuality to belong, and how much should a person hold on to their individuality versus belonging to a group. So, kind of you can ask yourself, like, what's that core emotion for the character through that's going to be woven throughout this story? Like, it's probably with that type of theme, it might be something along the lines of anxiety or fear or shame. Um, and like I said, even though they're going to be experiencing a lot of emotions, but when we see that core emotion constantly playing out, like when they're around the group, like how are they feeling? Are they feeling anxious if they're different? Are they feeling anxious about a part of themselves that's very unique? Um, and by showing that emotion and really bringing it out through showing, you're going to make your story's message that much more stronger. Okay, because you're going to show, like, it's going to really like course through the reader's veins, like the cost of, belonging to a group versus the cost of being your true self. Um, and to show like how through the character they're going to experience that. So, and then when I studied somatic writing, I realized that I was kind of actually using somatic writing intuitively to show and not tell, specifically when it came to character emotions. And you're going to see why in a minute. And then I was like, oh, like, if I do this more intentionally, it's even more powerful. Like, like intentionally using somatic writing to bring out the character's emotions. And somatic writing, in its simplest explanation, is writing from the body. It's used a lot in trauma therapy. I think it's very powerful for inner growth, for personal transformation, for journaling. Even if you're not using it to dig into your deepest traumas, um, but just to like connect to your body and to connect to your emotions and to be able to express them. Okay. And, it's like instead of just naming an emotion like fear, shame, anxiety, you translate what those emotions feel like internally. Like you kind of drop into your body. And I think honestly, like we actually experience our emotions first in the body before we label them. And honestly, like I think labeling an emotion is more like an intentional type of thing, or if we're trying to tell someone else how we're feeling, but we experience emotions in our body, or could even, and it's not only inside our body, it's also how it manifests out on the outside. Like when you see a person acting a certain way, um, you could tell like if they're angry or sad or happy. And this also shows us how emotions are real. Like when someone tells you like, oh, get over it, just get over it already. Like with somatic writing, like you get to really see how emotions are real. And when you're trying to describe a character and you're like, whoa, like emotions like really exist. Because like, when someone's angry and you see their face become red and you see them slamming the counter and you see like all that built up tension, like as their muscles are clenching. So it shows us that emotions have a real energy to them. And like, let's say, for example, like when you experience an emotion, like let's say you're all of a sudden, it's the middle of the day and all of a sudden you feel like weighed down and you feel like you just need to lay down and you just feel this sinking feeling. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my goodness, I'm feeling sad or I'm dreading something. and then it's like first you experience that feeling, outside of your body and inside your body, and then it's like, oh, I'm sad. Oh, I'm anxious. Oh, I'm fearful. We don't walk around experiencing our life as like, I'm happy, I'm sad, um, I'm excited. That's like once we're trying to communicate with others. First we feel that like rush going through our body and the happiness, like our face lifting up, and then it's like, oh, I'm excited. So we can use these type of things also to show and not tell a character's emotions. Okay, so there's really two ways to use somatic writing. There's a more direct body-based approach, direct sensation, a felt sense. And then there's the expressive approach, which is using more metaphor and image. And like the honest truth is that even when you're using the second approach, you're definitely um, grounding it in the first approach also, because somatic writing is always starting from the body. So we're always starting with a body-based approach, and we kind of, if you choose, we could branch out even more with the second approach of using more metaphors and imagery. Okay, so this is the two types that I want to talk about right now. So this is the more body-based approach. It's more grounded, physical style. You focus on what's literally happening in the body. And the metaphors are more subtle because you're still using metaphors, but it's just like subtle metaphors because you're really staying in the body. Like things that belong to the body, like a breath, a heartbeat, muscle tension, and posture. You're really describing, and you're first tapping into that, and you're describing that. So, you would, and like, by the way, there's two ways to do this also. I would say that you could either do it from within yourself or from within your character, whatever feels more natural to you. If it feels more natural to drop into your own body and to experience how you experience that emotion, or bring up a memory of when you had that emotion and like plunk yourself into that story of what happened to you. Or you could just imagine your character and plunk yourself inside your character. But the point of the body-based approach is that you're sticking to like what's going on in the body. Okay, so let's just give an example. So this is an example of telling an emotion. She was anxious. Okay, so so how would you use a body-based somatic writing approach to show us that she was anxious instead of telling us? So here's an example. Her throat tightened, breath caught halfway in, pulse thudding too fast against her ribs. Okay, notice how we're staying in the body. Her throat is tightening. She's catching her breath. Her pulse is thudding. Okay, so but we're still showing it. We're not mentioning the emotion, and we're just showing what's happening inside of her body. And also, just to be clear, it's also somatic writing if you start from outside the body. Like if she's, like let's say with anxiety, like she was pacing back and forth, tapping her foot, her palms were getting sweaty, maybe her mind was racing. Well, that's already inside. But the point is, you could start on the outside. I would definitely recommend, even if you're starting on the outside, to go in a little bit deeper, at least some of the time. It really brings us closer to the character and closer to their experience instead of like observing them on the outside. So that's the body-based approach, and here's the expressive approach. So it's more intuitive, imaginal way of writing from the body. And personally, for me, I love this more than the first approach. I mean, although, like I said, you kind of do have to combine them, but I'm going to get to that. I really feel like it actually helps me connect more to my body and more to my character and their internal experience than staying with the first approach. But you kind of have to feel out what works for you and consider the type of experience that you're trying to give your reader when deciding which one to use. Okay, and I'm also like, I just enjoy the creativity of this type more also. It's more fun for me, but like I said, you need to like look at these two approaches and see what's working for you. Um, so instead of describing the sensation directly, you let it transform into an image or a metaphor. So here's an example. Instead of saying his heart filled with fear, which would be telling the emotion, you're like telling us that he's full of fear. You write, his heart grasped for straws like a wild-eyed mountain climber who lost his grip. Wow, very vivid image. And you could see how you're not like directly staying in the body anymore. Okay, it's not like a heart that's thudding or um, a quickening pulse or a throat that's tightening. It's like an image that's outside of the body. But like I said, you still need to start from within the body. Um, so like, in this example, it's like we're starting with the heart. You still need to ground it in the body. And kind of like really the most powerful way is to combine both of them, kind of like half the sentence could be, grounding in the body and then kind of transforming that into a metaphor or an image. So, yeah, and like I said, this actually helps me to connect to my character more, to my character's experience more. So I often use this approach. Okay, so here is an exercise for you. So take a sentence where you've written, she felt emotion, or, whatever that emotion is. And you could go through your writing and you could kind of, highlight sentences where you were telling an emotion. And even though if it's not, she felt XYZ, but, it could even be like, like that other example where it was like her heart filled with fear, just anywhere that you're labeling an emotion instead of showing it. And rewrite it twice, once using body sensation and once using metaphor. And when, like I said, like when you're writing using the metaphor, you're still grounding it in the body. So make sure that you do that. But still write it twice, only based on body sensation, and the second time, also add a metaphor. Um, and here's an example that I came up with. So she felt ashamed, labeling that emotion of shame. So body-based, it would sound like she kept her head down and averted her eyes, heat climbing up her chest, stomach twisting, bringing her inwards. So notice how we're staying with the body. We're starting outside of like what that looks like on the outside, head down, averting her eyes, and then we're going inside, heat climbing up her chest, stomach twisting, bringing her inwards. Like I said, like we're still using subtle metaphors, but we're still very much grounded in the body over here. Okay? And metaphor based, his comments made the lump in her throat spill into her chest like ink, staining everything it touched, retracting her further into herself. So there we were bringing in a metaphor of that lump in her throat spilling into her chest like ink. Okay, and it's still grounded in the body. We mentioned her chest, we mentioned a lump in her throat, and how she's retracting further into herself, like, okay, so that's an example that I have come up with, but now go ahead and do it in your writing. Um, Alrighty. Okay, thank you so much for joining me. And if you enjoyed this content, please hit the subscribe button. I would love to be able to provide more content like this for you to be able, if you're a writer, that you could really write transformational stories, or if you're a creative or a deep feeler, that you could get in touch with your inner story and bring that more into your creative work, into your life. All right, thank you so much for joining me.